Ruth Delaney watches from her car as the family she was once part of gathers inside Delaney House, a place she used to call home. The windows glow amber against the gray November afternoon, light flickering like memory. She doesn't move to get out right away. Instead, she watches the silhouettes pass behind drawn curtains. Laughter, heads tilted in mock affection, Catherine's unmistakable frame gliding across the front parlor like a stage actress in rehearsal. Ruth used to stand beside her in this very driveway 10 years ago, carrying casserole dishes and Elliot's cane. Those days, she thought she belonged. She was wrong. A decade had passed since the funeral. Elliot had placed a hand on her shoulder that day, a hand still strong despite the tremors, and told her quietly, "You'll always have a place here." She had believed him, but promises she had learned didn't carry past the grave. Ruth finally opens the car door and steps into the cold. Her heels crunch over gravel as she approaches the front steps. The wind is sharp, carrying the scent of burnt cedar and something distant, decaying. A shadow passes behind the lace of the front door. When it opens, it is not a butler or family aide, but Catherine herself. "Oh," Catherine says, the corners of her mouth barely lifting. "You came." "I was invited," Ruth replies evenly, holding up the formal envelope that bore the family crest. "Of course," Catherine says, stepping aside. "Come in. It's good to know formality still means something." The house smells of lemon oil and old money. The floorboards, refinished last year, don't creak anymore. Ruth notes this with quiet bitterness. Some legacies get preserved, while others are erased one subtle fix at a time. Family members loiter in the grand parlor, seated in velvet armchairs beneath portraits of ancestors who would frown at today's gathering. Ruth's late husband, Marcus, had once said the house felt haunted, but not by ghosts, by expectations. His portrait used to hang above the fireplace. It now sits on a side table in the hallway, half obscured by a lamp. Derek is slouched on a leather ottoman near the window, scrolling on his phone. When he sees Ruth, his eyes flick up, then down again with a muted groan. The family attorney, a dry, humorless man named Harlan Finch, clears his throat. "If everyone is ready, we'll proceed with the reading." Silence settles like dust. Ruth perches on the edge of a settee. Catherine, unhurried, crosses her legs and folds her hands in her lap, like a queen receiving counsel. Finch opens the envelope with a bone-handled letter opener. His voice, when he begins, is mechanical, the syllables clipped, the cadence practiced. "To my beloved children, Catherine and Marcus, and to my grandson Derek." Ruth leans forward slightly. "Omusum. I leave equal stewardship of the Delaney estate and all accompanying financial assets, to be administered by my daughter Catherine Prescott, whom I trust to act in the best interests of the family legacy." There is no mention of Ruth. Not in the estate, not in the governance of Elliot's community fund, not even in a gesture of thanks. Just the soft flutter of pages turning and the creak of a chair as someone shifts uncomfortably. Finch continues, naming minor bequests, antique firearms to a nephew, vintage records to a cousin, but Ruth knows it's done. The space where her name should have been is silent. She stands slowly. "Where is the codicil Elliot signed in September? I know it exists." The room stills. Only the grandfather clock dares to speak, ticking its measured disapproval. Catherine doesn't move at first. Then, slowly, she turns. "If such a thing existed, dear, it would have been in the envelope." Her smile is practiced, polished, but her fingers, resting on the arm of the chair, twitch once a tell. Ruth remembers from years of watching poker games by the fireplace. Someone exhales too loudly. Derek pockets his phone. "I was with him," Ruth says softly. I helped him draft it. Was it notarized? Catherine asks, voice sugar-laced. Filed appropriately? Elliot was very particular about procedure. Ruth doesn't respond. Not here. Not yet. I'm sorry you feel excluded, Catherine says, standing now. Her tone suggests anything but sorrow. But Elliot made his intentions clear, and Harlan has confirmed everything is legally binding. Pastor Redding, who has remained quiet, clears his throat. He did speak of revisions near the end. Catherine looks at him, smile dimming. Reverend, you understand that grief can distort memory. I understand that Elliot was never afraid of clarity, he replies gently. And he was clear about one thing: he trusted Ruth. A pause stretches across the room, taut and delicate as blown glass. Ruth senses the weight of every eye, every assumption, pressing against her ribs. She leaves before anyone can dismiss her further. The air outside is colder now. The trees seem to lean inward, their bare branches whispering secrets. Later, in her car, she sits with the engine off and stares at the house. The windows no longer glow. The party continues, but she is once again outside, watching through glass. She doesn't cry. That part of her is long gone. Instead, she leans back, whispers into the silence. You promised me, Elliot. Then she reaches into the glove box and pulls out a small, worn notebook, Elliot's handwriting scrawled across the cover. A record of the conversations they had in his last weeks. A record of promises made, and now promises broken. Her fingers tremble as she opens to the last page. A line underlined 3 times. Final codicil Ruth as co-executor. Must file before Thanksgiving. But it never was. She closes the notebook and starts the engine. Inside the house, the family toasts. Catherine raises her glass. To legacy. Outside, Ruth drives into the cold. Catherine's smile doesn't waver. If such a thing existed, dear, it would have been in the envelope. Her voice is smooth, but her fingers twitch slightly. Ruth's voicemail pings. A quiet, nervous voice says, Mrs. Delaney, I think I found something you need to see. She listens to it again, her thumb hovering over the screen, as if replaying the message might make it clearer, more certain, more real. The voice doesn't sound familiar. Young, hesitant. But there's a tremor of urgency in it that pierces straight through the fog of doubt that's been gathering since the will reading. She doesn't call back right away. Instead, she sets the phone down beside the mug of lukewarm tea she forgot to drink, and stares at the living room floor as though answers might rise from the worn rug. The house is quiet, save for the wind chattering against the windows and the faint ticking of a mantel clock that used to sit in Elliot's study. She had brought it here after his funeral, like a relic, like a promise. That study, his sanctuary, had once been a shared space. She would bring him coffee, sit quietly as he read depositions or scribbled on legal pads, often speaking more with glances than words. One memory nudges forward now. Elliot looking up from a draft, saying, One day this place will need someone who can remember the difference between a legacy and a loophole. At the time, she thought he was talking about one of his non-profit boards. Now she wonders if he had been talking about her. She taps the phone again, this time calling back the number. It rings once, twice, then a voice answers, small and breathless. Hello? This is Ruth Delaney, she says. You left a message for me. Oh, yes, I wasn't sure you'd call, the girl stammers. My name is Lena Park. I work at the Ashe County Clerk's office. Ruth sits forward. Go on. I'm not supposed to say anything, Lena whispers, but last month I notarized a codicil from Mr. Elliot Delaney. It was filed with his case. But when I went to check the status this morning, it was gone from the system. like it never existed. But I always keep a backup, and I think you need to see it. 15 minutes later, Ruth is standing outside a squat, concrete building downtown. The Asha County Government Annex is unremarkable gray brick, low ceilings, buzzing lights, but it feels sacred now. Or dangerous. She's not sure which. Inside, Lena waits near the copier room, a manila envelope clutched to her chest. She can't be older than 28. Her coat is too big, her eyes shifting nervously behind thick-rimmed glasses. I shouldn't be doing this, Lena says, as she leads Ruth to a break room with a closed door. But it didn't feel right. Mr. Delaney was always kind. He gave me advice when I was trying to apply for law school. Lena places the envelope on the table and slides it across. Ruth opens it slowly. Inside is a scan of the missing codicil, dated, notarized, signed. It's real. It's him. Elliot had written clearly, I name Ruth Delaney as co-executor of my estate. I direct that 15% of liquid assets be diverted to a community legal assistance fund to be designed and overseen by her discretion. Ruth closes her eyes, letting the silence fill the room. For a second, she feels something like grief laced with vindication. I logged it myself, Lena says, her voice breaking the moment. 2 days after he passed, it was still there. Then yesterday, it vanished. I checked with the supervising clerk. He just said, sometimes files are misrouted. But I saw the look on his face. He knew. You kept a copy, Ruth says quietly. I do that sometimes, Lena admits. Not supposed to, but something told me this one mattered. Back in her car, Ruth presses the document flat on her passenger seat. She drives home on instinct, barely seeing the road, her mind rolling through every conversation, every glance, every moment she dismissed as grief-clouded memory. Catherine's too easy smile. The absence of Marcus's photo. The way Derek wouldn't look her in the eye. At home, she pulls out a thin folder from her bottom drawer, labeled Edie Sept. Inside are Elliot's handwritten notes. They mirror the language in the codicil, sentences he drafted, phrases underlined 3 times, the same ones in the notarized version. Elliot had meant it. He had tried. But someone Catherine, it had to be Catherine, had made sure it never reached the table. Her phone rings. Ruth picks it up without checking the screen. Catherine, she says flatly. A pause. I assume you've been busy, Catherine says. Busy reading what Elliot meant to say. A beat of silence follows. Then Catherine's voice cools. I don't know what fantasy you've spun up, Ruth, but I suggest you stop before it becomes embarrassing. I have the codicil and Elliot's notes. You have what? I'm giving you a chance to explain before I bring this forward. Another pause. A sharp inhale. Then, I have nothing to explain. If such a thing existed, it would have been in the envelope. Anything else is irrelevant. The call disconnects. Ruth sets the phone down, her hands trembling now not from fear, but from fury held too long. That night, after dinner, she opens the front door to take the trash out. The porch light flickers above her. She flips the lid of the bin and pauses. Her mailbox is open. She walks slowly to it. Inside is a single sheet of paper folded once. No envelope, no name, just one typed line. Stop digging. You won't like what you find. She stares at it, the cold air tightening her lungs. Then she folds it neatly, walks back inside, and places it beside Elliot's notes. Let them come. Catherine's smile doesn't waver. If such a thing existed, dear, it would have been in the envelope. Her voice is smooth, but her fingers twitch slightly. Later that night, Ruth finds her mailbox slightly ajar. Inside is a note, typed and unsigned. Stop digging. You won't like what you find. Ruth sits at her kitchen table, surrounded by untouched dishes from a Thanksgiving no one invited her to. The cranberry sauce has congealed. The stuffing is dense and cold. The pie sits under a sheet of plastic wrap, its edges hardening with every hour she refuses to touch it. A leftover meal from a holiday meant to gather, to heal. But in this house, the silence eats first. She stares at the empty chair across from her, the one that once held Elliot. Every Thanksgiving he'd say grace in that deep, deliberate voice, a little tired, but always full of gratitude. Now the only voice in the room is hers, and she's not ready to use it. On the table beside the dishes is the folder. Inside, the codicil from Lena, Elliot's handwritten notes, and now the anonymous threat from her mailbox. Stop digging. She's read it at least 15 times. Each time it feels less like a warning and more like confirmation. She reaches for her phone, scrolls through old voicemails until she finds it, Elliot's last message, saved since October. His voice crackles faintly. If they ever try to erase you, you make sure your voice stays loud. He said it jokingly, but she hears something different now. A man trying to leave behind more than memory. Outside, rain taps gently on the window, a rhythm that mimics her pulse. She stands and walks to the bookshelf, pulling down one of Elliot's old legal journals. Stuffed between the pages are more notes, scribbled in his slanted handwriting outlines of the legal aid fund he'd talked about starting. Notes Ruth had helped him shape, edit, argue over late at night when she still wore her wedding ring. She places the journal in the folder. Then she picks up the old brass key Pastor Redding gave her the day after the funeral. It had come with no explanation, only a quiet, "You'll know what it's for when you're ready." She hadn't been ready. Not until now. The key glints as she steps out into the rain, her coat pulled tight. She walks past the hedgerow, toward the greenhouse. The structure had fallen into disuse after Marcus died. Elliot went there less and less. Still, he had always refused to tear it down. Some places are meant to wait, he'd said. The door creaks open, and the scent hits her old soil. Rotting herbs, a faint sweetness of lavender clinging stubbornly to the air. Shelves are covered in dust. Empty pots are stacked like bones. The vines have overgrown one side of the glass. She steps toward the old desk in the corner. It's warped now, the drawers slightly swollen with years of humidity. One of them has a brass lock. She kneels, fits the key in. It sticks. She exhales, then turns, and it gives. Inside the drawer is a small black recorder, the kind Elliot used for dictating notes. A faded yellow sticky note clings to it. Final thoughts. Her hand trembles as she picks it up, her thumb brushing over the play button. She presses it. A pause, then a cough. Then his voice raspy but clear. "If you're hearing this, I didn't get everything in writing. That's on me. Catherine's stubborn, and I've been too tired to fight every battle. But Ruth, this is for you." Her breath catches. "You were the one who stayed, who asked the hard questions, who saw me not as the Delaney patriarch, but as a man who'd made too many compromises." A long pause. "I left instructions. Maybe they made it. Maybe they didn't. But if you're hearing this, then you already know I meant for you to finish what we started. The fund, the house, the truth. And if Catherine stands in the way, remind her that legacy doesn't live in her pearls or the Delaney name. It lives in service." Silence. Then the tape clicks off. Ruth presses play again. This time she listens with her eyes closed, letting his words wash over her like balm and flame. She listens to it twice more before slipping it into the folder. Back at home, she dries her hair by the stove, the warmth rising slowly into her bones. The rain continues, steady and soft. She calls Lena first. Would you be willing to provide an affidavit, something formal, notarized, confirming the codicil existed and was in the system? Yes, Lena says. I already started drafting it. Then she calls Pastor Redding. He answers on the second ring. I found something, she tells him. I thought you might, he says. I kept that key for years. Elliot told me, give it to her when she's ready. He never said what was inside. It's his voice, she whispers. Proof. Then it's time, he replies. Later that afternoon, she walks back through the greenhouse, now knowing it had waited for her. Everything had. Elliot's words, the key, the truth itself, all of it waiting for her to decide she was no longer afraid of the fight. As the sun sets, Ruth sits by the window with the folder in her lap. She watches the evening swallow the horizon, the sky bruising purple and gold. Catherine is likely sipping tea in the sitting room, certain that everything is secure. Ruth leans forward and whispers, "It's time." She stands, walks to the desk, and opens her laptop. The file she attaches is titled edfinal.mp3. She sends it to Lena, then to Pastor Redding. And for a moment the house feels quiet in a different way, not empty, but poised, as if even the walls are holding their breath. Ruth stands, walks to the window and whispers, "It's time." The chapter ends with her emailing the tape to Lena and Pastor Redding. Catherine's voice rings out across the table, polished and confident. To family, and to knowing your place within it. The clinking of crystal glasses follows, like the final punctuation of a toast rehearsed too many times. Ruth watches the way Catherine raises her glass, without a flicker of emotion. The candlelight dances along the rim, casting glimmers onto the faces around the long mahogany table. Even here, beneath portraits of Delaney ancestors and the heavy gaze of oil-painted history, the warmth is artificial. Ruth's own glass remains untouched. She remembers the last holiday dinner with Elliot, his fork clinking against his plate, as he told the story of the first time he marched in a student protest. Catherine had rolled her eyes. Derek had scrolled his phone. Only Ruth had asked questions. Legacy, Elliot had said then, is not what you leave to be admired, it's what you leave unfinished. Now the table is dressed in white linen and tradition, turkey carved with surgeon precision, stuffing molded into perfect symmetry, a roast glazed to glistening perfection. But beneath it all, something simmers, something false. Ruth feels the folder pressing against her side beneath her cardigan. The codicil, the affidavit from Lena. Elliot's voice on a flash drive, tucked neatly into a small inner pocket. Her heart thuds, slow and heavy. She waits. Conversation continues in stilted waves, Derek murmuring about a potential business venture in Atlanta. Catherine speaking proudly of her daughter's college acceptance as though reading from a press release. No one looks at Ruth. Finally, she lays her napkin across her lap and speaks. There's something we need to address. Forks pause mid-air. Heads tilt slightly. I've come into possession of legal documents that show Elliot intended for his will to be revised. A hush, thick as molasses, spreads across the room. I have the notarized codicil. I have the recording of his intent. And I have confirmation from the notary and Elliot's personal notes. Her voice is calm, measured. He named me co-executor. He created a fund. He made decisions none of you were told about. Catherine sets her glass down with an audible click. Ruth, she says sweetly, I know grief can make us cling to fantasies, but Elliot's will was executed legally, properly. There is no such document. Ruth pulls the flash drive from her pocket, sets it gently beside the cranberry sauce. This says otherwise. Pastor Redding, seated silently at the far end of the table, gives a quiet nod. Catherine's smile tightens. You're being manipulated. No, Ruth says. You manipulated the system. You removed the codicil from the clerk's office. You tried to erase me. Derek shifts in his seat, fingers twitching. Mom, not now, Catherine says sharply, but Ruth turns to him. Did you file the paperwork? Did you use your access to pull the codicil from the system? Derek opens his mouth, closes it. His jaw tightens. She told me it would complicate everything. She, Ruth echoes. Your mother. Catherine stands. This is absurd. Pastor Redding speaks, his voice low but unshakable. Elliot told me, 2 days before he passed, that he regretted not making things clearer. He said Ruth was the only one who ever challenged him for the right reasons. I was there, Catherine. A beat of silence. Then Ruth places the flash drive into a small, portable speaker and presses play. The room fills with Elliot's voice. If you're hearing this, I didn't get everything in writing. That's on me. But Ruth, this is for you. No one speaks as his message continues. Even the candles seem to flicker less. You were the one who stayed, who saw me as more than my name. I meant for you to carry this forward, not Catherine, not Derek, you. When the tape ends, Ruth looks directly at Catherine. You knew, she says. You had to erase me to keep control. Catherine doesn't respond, but the tremble in her hand is unmistakable. A tiny shiver of porcelain on porcelain as she lifts her cup and sets it down again. Derek pushes his chair back suddenly. I'm done, he mutters, and storms from the room. No one stops him. Ruth doesn't follow. She doesn't need to. Catherine remains standing, her voice low, now raw. You've made a terrible mistake. A flash of lightning illuminates the room as Catherine whispers, You've made a terrible mistake. But her hands are trembling. The envelope arrives by certified courier, signed with a pen that trembles slightly in Ruth's hand. It's heavier than paper should feel. The seal carries the insignia of the Ashe County Surrogate Court, and Ruth already knows what it says before she opens it. But still, she moves slowly, slicing through the flap with a letter opener Elliot once kept on his desk, shaped like a brass feather. Upstairs, the rain drums quietly on the roof. A cold front swept through overnight, pulling every leaf from the trees. The landscape outside is bare now, just spindly limbs and wet bark, like nature itself is bracing for something. She unfolds the document and reads. Her name is printed clearly. Ruth Delaney, co-executor of the estate of Elliot Samuel Delaney. The court has reviewed the evidence. The codicil is deemed valid. The original will is overturned. It's done, or at least the legal part is. She sets the papers down and exhales through her nose. Not triumph, not relief. Something more difficult, the weight of winning something she never should have had to fight for. A knock sounds at the front door. She doesn't check the peephole. She already knows. Catherine stands on the porch, dressed in black as if attending her own funeral. The wind tugs at her coat, but her posture remains elegant, composed. Only her eyes betray her dull, shadowed, stripped of their usual icy polish. Ruth steps aside. You're not here to apologize. No, Catherine replies, stepping into the hallway. I'm here to reclaim what was stolen. Ruth closes the door behind her. You mean what you failed to steal. They stand facing each other in the front sitting room, surrounded by dusty bookshelves and framed photographs Elliot never took down. The photo of Marcus as a boy still hangs above the fireplace. Catherine's gaze flickers toward it, then away. You humiliated me, she says finally. You erased me, Ruth replies, and you almost got away with it. I was protecting what Elliot built. No, Ruth says calmly. You were protecting your power. Catherine's jaw sets. You think because the court sided with you, you've won? This family won't follow you. The board won't listen. You're not a Delaney. Neither were you, Ruth says quietly. You just married into it first. Silence stretches between them. Catherine breaks it with a bitter laugh. You think starting some charity makes you righteous? I think honoring Elliot's wishes makes me faithful, and turning this estate into a place where people like Marcus, like Lena, can build something that matters? Yes. That makes me righteous enough. Catherine's face flushes, but she doesn't yell. She simply looks around the room, as if memorizing it before it's no longer hers. I've filed for an injunction, she says coldly. Don't get too comfortable. You'll lose, Ruth says. Maybe, but I'd rather burn this house down than see you take it from me. She walks out without waiting for a reply. The door clicks shut like the closing of a tomb. Hours later, Ruth meets Pastor Redding in the old study. They sit across from each other at the desk Elliot used for 30 years. Papers are stacked neatly between them. Plans for the Legal Aid Center, grant applications, community proposals. She won't stop, Ruth says. She'll drag this through every court she can find. She'll lose, Pastor Redding says simply. You have truth on your side, and Elliot's voice. Ruth nods, but her hands twist slowly in her lap. The truth doesn't always win. It does, he says gently, when someone is willing to carry it. They go over the final revisions together. The center will be called the Marcus Delaney Foundation for Justice and Education. The name lands in her chest like a blessing one Elliot never dared speak, but always hoped someone would. That evening, Ruth walks the empty halls of the estate. She runs her fingers along the banister, touches the wood paneling Elliot once oiled by hand. She finds herself in the greenhouse without realizing she's come. The recorder sits on the workbench. She presses play, listening once more. Not for evidence, for comfort, for confirmation that love, even flawed, can still leave light in its wake. As the message ends, she looks toward the horizon, where clouds are gathering again. In the distance, headlights appear on the long driveway. A sheriff's cruiser. Ruth watches as it comes to a slow, deliberate stop. A figure steps out and reaches for the doorbell. She doesn't move. Not yet. Not until she knows who sent them. The sheriff tips his hat the moment Ruth opens the door. Ma'am, he says, voice even but weary. I'm here on behalf of the Ashe County Clerk's office. Just need a quick confirmation of some property files. Routine, but time-sensitive. Behind him, the cruiser idles in the driveway, headlights bathing the bare trees in white light. Ruth blinks, then gestures toward the foyer. Come in. The documents are upstairs. She leads him into Elliot's former office, her footsteps slow but sure. The sheriff moves carefully through the house, eyes lingering a little longer on the photos in the hallway. He doesn't comment on them. When they reach the study, Ruth pulls open a drawer and retrieves a slim folder. These are the originals, she says, handing them over. Elliot's last revisions. Registered. Certified. The sheriff scans the first page. Thank you. I won't be long. She nods, then watches as he quietly reads. The rain outside has stopped, but the wind scratches faintly at the windows like something impatient. The sheriff finishes flipping through the papers, then pulls out a folded sheet from his pocket and places it on the desk. A court summons. Catherine Delaney has filed an emergency appeal to block the estate transition, he says softly. Says her position was unlawfully revoked. Claims the will revision is fraudulent. Ruth's heart tightens, not in surprise but in exhaustion. She stares at the paper, then at him. She lost the original ruling. She's requesting a temporary injunction. It'll be reviewed in circuit court next Thursday. Ruth lets the silence hold. Then she says, She won't win. She doesn't care about Elliot's wishes, only his name. The sheriff sighs, nods once. I believe you. But the system takes time. I've waited long enough. That night she meets with Lena and Pastor Redding in the study. The fire burns low, but the air hums with something urgent. Lena's laptop glows with spreadsheets and grant applications. Redding holds a thick file of signed affidavits. She's trying to stall us, Lena says, voice sharp. If she gets even a partial stay, the funding accounts will be frozen. We lose 3 months at minimum. Then we don't wait, Ruth replies. We act now. They spread the plans out across the table. The foundation's site is ready, the deed already transferred to the community trust. The contractors are lined up, the funds earmarked. We launch in 2 days, Ruth says. Soft opening, no press, just people. Redding raises an eyebrow. You think Catherine won't hear about it? I hope she does, Ruth says. 2 days later, Ruth walks up the cracked steps of what used to be the old Winston Library on Birch Avenue, shuttered for years, crumbling from neglect. Now the windows have been replaced, the roof patched, the garden weeded. A new wooden sign hangs beside the door. Marcus Delaney Center for Justice and Education. She unlocks the door. The scent of fresh paint and new carpet meets her like a promise. Inside, volunteers work quietly. A pair of young men assemble desks. A retired social worker files intake forms. A single mother with red eyes but steady hands sets out coffee mugs. No cameras, no ribbon cutting. Just work. A small group of locals filters in by noon, housing applications in hand, questions heavy in their throats. Ruth greets each one by name, offering seats, pouring coffee. By late afternoon, a reporter shows up. Not a major outlet, just a local blog. He recognizes her. Didn't expect to see you here, he says. I live here, she replies. This was always the plan. He gestures to the sign. Is it true the Delaney estate is in legal dispute? She smiles gently. No one's disputing who Marcus was. That's enough for today. That evening, as twilight stains the sky, Ruth walks out onto the center's small porch. Her phone buzzes in her pocket. A message from Catherine. Just one sentence. This is war. Ruth puts the phone down. She looks out at the street, at the lit windows of the center behind her, and whispers, then let it be. There are stories that do not end with peace, but with clarity. Stories that leave behind no clean resolutions, but something sharper, deeper, the truth, finally spoken. This was one of them. In the aftermath of legal filings and whispered warnings, after flash drives and family dinners turned into battlegrounds, Ruth stood not as the victor, but as the survivor of a war no one else had the courage to name. She had not set out to win. She had only wanted the truth to remain whole, to give Marcus's name something better than silence, to give Elliot's voice a place to land. But sometimes, when you fight for truth, you end up inheriting everything else, the bitterness, the backlash, the responsibility. The estate was no longer a house. It had become a memory with walls, layered with dust and betrayal and voices that would never come back. Catherine's lawyers continued their campaign, but their arguments frayed with time, worn thin by public opinion and private evidence. Eventually, they stopped filing, not because they agreed, but because they knew they'd already lost something greater, the story. The Marcus Delaney Center opened without ceremony, just as Ruth had wanted. There were no ribbon cuttings, no speeches, just people arriving with their stories and their fears and their need. Single mothers, high school dropouts, ex-convicts looking for a second start, they didn't care who Elliot had once been. They cared who Ruth was willing to become for them. Ruth came every day. She filed papers, wrote grant letters, handed out coffee, and taught quiet lessons in dignity. She walked through those halls the way a mother walks through a house, still filled with ghosts. Carefully, reverently. She wore Elliot's watch, even though it no longer ticked. She said his name out loud every morning, not out of longing, but out of reminder. We are shaped by who we've lost and by what we choose to do with the space they leave behind. Derek called once, just once. His voice was quieter than she remembered. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said, "I didn't know how to stand up to her." And Ruth replied, "Now you know how not to sit down." She didn't ask him to visit. She didn't need an apology to keep building. Pastor Redding passed away that winter quietly, with a Bible on his chest, and a handwritten note for Ruth left at the foot of his bed. "You were always the steward." She cried, not just for him, but for what he had carried for so long without ever demanding thanks. Catherine left the state, sold the beach house. The last anyone heard, she'd moved to Charleston under her maiden name. The family name, once so carefully guarded, had cracked open, but Ruth had already made peace with that. Some names don't need to be preserved, only corrected. And Marcus. His name now hung above a library door, engraved into wood that would weather but not vanish. Children said it aloud during roll call. Clients signed it on forms. Volunteers wore it on lanyards. His name, once hidden in corners of shame, now lived in the open air. Sometimes Ruth would stand by that door and listen. Not for voices, for footsteps, for signs that what had been buried was now moving, alive. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not a gift you offer the dead. It's the door you open for the living to walk through. She never remarried. She didn't need to. Her life had become full in other ways. Not quieter, not easier, but real. She learned that the cost of truth was not just pain, it was possibility. And the inheritance that mattered most wasn't land or money or names carved in stone. It was the courage to tell the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. It was the audacity to rebuild where others had burned. Some evenings, she would sit on the old bench outside the greenhouse, the one Elliot had repaired for her before the wedding. The lavender had come back, slowly, creeping along the edges of the glass. She would press her hand against the earth and feel the pulse of something that refused to be undone. In the end, Ruth didn't just keep the legacy, she rewrote it, not in ink or court records, but in every person who came through that center and left stronger. In every truth spoken where silence used to sit. In every child who asked, "Who was Marcus Delaney?" And every volunteer who answered, "He was someone worth remembering." And in that, the story was no longer about revenge. It was about redemption. It was about a woman who had been erased, who wrote herself back in not as footnote, but as foundation. The philosophy remains. Some truths are buried, but the ones worth keeping find their way back to light. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of truth, legacy, and love, that doesn't forget, leave a comment with the number 1. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories. Like this, stories about healing, about justice, about the quiet people who change everything.